He had not spoken to anyone in 4 days when I first saw him. Not 4 hours, 4 days. I only knew that because his neighbor told me, almost as a warning, almost like she expected me to turn around and walk back to my car. He was sitting on his porch in the same clothes he had been wearing since Tuesday, she said. Nobody checked on him. Nobody called. And the family that had his name, his house money, his signature on documents he no longer understood, had not visited in 11 months. I was not supposed to be there. I want to be honest about that from the beginning. I was 26 years old, I was new to my job, and my caseload was already impossible. I had 43 other names on a spreadsheet. His name, Walter, had been passed to me because my colleague quit and left no notes. So I showed up with a clipboard, a phone with a dead battery, and absolutely no idea that this one man, this quiet, forgotten old man, was sitting at the center of one of the most deliberate acts of financial cruelty I had ever seen a family commit. I knocked on that door and my life changed. Not in the way that sounds poetic and soft. In the way that makes you wake up at 3 in the morning and stare at the ceiling because you keep running the numbers and they still do not add up the way the family claimed they did. What I found inside that house was not just a lonely old man. It was evidence. It was a system. It was a family that had spent years making a quiet, kind, trusting person feel like a burden so they could erase him cleanly before he was even gone. And I was the person they forgot to account for. Because by the time they realized I existed, I already had copies of everything. Before I go any further, I need to ask you something. Because this story made me question everything I thought I knew about family loyalty and who we decide matters. When someone is slowly written out of their own life, out of their own money, their own home, their own story, and they do not even realize it is happening, is that cruelty? Is it theft? Or is it just what some families do when they think nobody is watching? Stay with me. Because the moment you think you have figured out the worst of it, there is always another layer. And I want to know what you would have done if you were sitting where I was sitting. My name is Olivia, and I need to tell you something before I start. I am not a dramatic person. I am not someone who looks for conflict. I grew up in a house where you kept your head down, you did your work, and you trusted that good people would be treated well in the end. I carried that belief with me into adulthood. I carried it into my job. I carried it all the way up to that front porch on a Thursday afternoon in late October. And then I watched it shatter so completely that I am still finding the pieces. I worked as a social services coordinator for a county office in a mid-sized city in the American South. My job, in the most honest terms, was to check in on elderly and vulnerable adults who had been flagged by someone, a hospital, a neighbor, a school counselor, a stranger who made one phone call and then moved on with their life. I was not a lawyer. I was not a police officer. I had no special authority to walk into anyone's home and demand answers. All I had was a clipboard, a case file, and the legal right to knock on a door. Walter's file had 3 lines in it when it came to me. His name, his age, which was 79, and a note that said, referred by neighbor, welfare concern, no family contact on record. That last part was not accurate. As I would come to learn, there was plenty of family. They had just made a choice not to be on that record. I knocked on Walter's door on a Thursday at 2 in the afternoon. He did not answer for a long time. I knocked again. I heard something inside, a slow shuffling, the kind of movement that takes effort, and then the door opened about 4 inches and a pair of very blue eyes looked at me through the gap. He asked me who I was. I told him. He stood there for a moment, and then he said something I did not expect. He said, "Did my daughter send you?" The word daughter came out of him with something attached to it. Not hope. Not exactly. Something more careful than hope. Like a man testing whether a thing might be true before he let himself feel anything about it. I told him honestly that I was there on a referral from the county office. He nodded like that was the answer he already knew was coming. He opened the door the rest of the way and let me in. The inside of the house told me more in 30 seconds than his file had told me in 3 lines. It was clean. That was the first thing I noticed. Not dusty, not chaotic, not the kind of neglected space you sometimes walk into and feel your chest tighten. It was clean and it was neat, and it was very, very empty in the way that spaces get when a person has been existing in them alone for too long. There was one mug on the counter, one plate drying beside the sink. one chair pulled close to the television, and one worn spot on the couch where someone always sat in the same place. Walter moved slowly but clearly. He was not confused. He knew what day it was. He knew who the president was. He knew my name 2 minutes after I told it to him because he repeated it back to me carefully, like he was filing it somewhere safe. Olivia, that is a nice name. My mother had a friend named Olivia. We sat down. I asked him the standard questions. How are you eating? Do you have medication you need help managing? Is there anything in the house that needs repair? He answered each one quietly and precisely. He was eating fine. He had a pill organizer his daughter had bought him 3 years ago, and he filled it himself. The back step had a loose board, but he had learned to step over it. He was not a man who wanted to complain. I could feel that clearly. He was the kind of person who had spent a lifetime measuring how much space he was allowed to take up, and had arrived at old age having made himself very, very small. I asked him gently about family. He paused. He had 2 children, he told me, a daughter named Renee and a son named Marcus. Renee lived about 40 minutes away. Marcus had moved to another state 6 years ago and called on birthdays, and not always then. He had 2 grandchildren through Renee that he had not seen in 14 months. Renee's husband, a man named Douglas, had told Walter about a year ago that it would be better if Walter did not come to the house for a while because the kids were at difficult ages and visits were disruptive. Walter had accepted this. He had sent cards for the grandchildren's birthdays. He did not know if they received them. I wrote all of this down and I tried to keep my face neutral. I was trained to keep my face neutral, but something was building in me already, something quiet and sharp. I asked him if he needed anything and he said, "No thank you, he was fine." I told him I would be back in 2 weeks to check in and that he could call our office number anytime. I left my direct number on a card and set it on his kitchen table. He picked it up immediately and put it in the drawer of his side table next to the couch, like he was putting it somewhere he could find it in the dark. I drove back to the office and I sat in my car for a few minutes before going inside. I did not know what I was feeling exactly, just that something was wrong. Not dramatically wrong, not in a way I could write up in a report yet. Just wrong in the way that a room smells like something happened in it even after the windows have been opened. I went back 2 weeks later as I said I would. And this time, Walter opened the door almost immediately, like he had been listening for my car. He had made coffee, he had 2 mugs out, and he was wearing a clean shirt. I want to stop here because I do not want you to miss what that detail means. He had made coffee for 2. He was expecting me. In the 2 weeks since my first visit, he had held on to the fact that I said I would come back, and he had prepared for it, and he had dressed for it, and he had 2 mugs out on the counter like having a visitor was an occasion worthy of ceremony. That was the moment this stopped being a routine check-in for me. We talked for almost an hour. He was more open this time. He told me about his life before the quiet. He had worked for 31 years as an electrician. He had owned his home for 44 years. He and his wife, Martha, had raised both children in this house, in this neighborhood, on this street. Martha had passed away 7 years ago from a stroke, and after that, Walter said, things had started to shift. At first slowly, then in ways he could not keep up with. He said, after she died, I think they thought I would need a lot of help. And I did for a while, but then I got my feet back. And by the time I had my feet back, the arrangements were already set. I asked him what he meant by arrangements. He looked at his coffee for a moment. Then he said, Renee and Douglas helped me with some paperwork after Martha passed. There was a lot to sort out. The house, the accounts, I was not in a good place then. I trusted them to handle it. I kept writing, I kept my face neutral, and inside, that quiet, sharp thing got sharper. I asked if he knew what was in the paperwork. He said, I think I signed some things over to make it easier. To avoid probate, Douglas said. It was just easier, he said, for when the time comes. I asked him, as gently as I have ever asked anyone anything, did he have a copy of those documents? He did not. He thought Renee had them. He had never asked for them back. I drove home that night and I could not sleep. I lay in the dark and I kept hearing that word he used, arrangements. The way he said it, like it was something done to him, not with him, but he had made peace with it because he trues. Ted, the people who did it. I went back 3 weeks later, and this time I asked if I could bring someone with me. A colleague. I told Walter she was a specialist in elder resources and she was just there to make sure he knew about every benefit and service available to him. That was true. It was also true that my colleague, a woman named Dana who had 16 years of experience in this field and a very specific instinct for financial exploitation, had asked to come the moment I described the situation to her. Dana and I sat with Walter for almost 2 hours. Dana asked questions I would not have known to ask. She asked about his bank accounts, gently, in the context of benefits. She asked whether his monthly income went to him directly or to another account. She asked whether he had a power of attorney and who held it. Walter answered everything. Slowly, carefully, he was not hiding anything. He was just a man who had not been asked these questions in a long time and was reconstructing the answers from memory. His Social Security went into an account. He thought the account was his. He had a debit card. He used it at the grocery store every week and it worked fine. He got a little cash each month, he said. A couple $100. He thought that was his spending money. Dana asked, who manages the account? Walter said, Renee set it up after Martha died, for simplicity. Dana looked at me very briefly. Just a flicker. Then she smiled at Walter and said that was very helpful and she was going to look into some programs that might add to his monthly income. In the parking lot afterward, Dana did not say anything dramatic. She said, Olivia, if what I think is happening, that man does not own his house anymore. And whatever money was in that estate after Martha died, I would be very surprised if much of it ever reached him. I felt cold. Not scared, cold. The kind of cold that comes when you understand something clearly for the first time and there is no way to unknow it. I went back to the office and I began pulling every public record I could legally access. I was not an investigator. I could not subpoena anything. But in this county, property records were public. Deed transfers were public. Certain court filings were public. I spent 4 evenings doing this after work. What I found made me sit very still at my kitchen table for a long time before I could write anything down. The house Walter had owned for 44 years, the house he and Martha raised their children in, the house he showed me the back step with the loose board because he knew every inch of it, had been transferred out of Walter's name 18 months after Martha died. It was now in the name of a trust. The trustee of that trust was Douglas, Renee's husband. Not Renee, Douglas. Walter had signed a quitclaim deed. I looked up the date. Walter would have been in the first year after Martha's death, grieving, overwhelmed, trusting. The deed transfer had no attorney listed on Walter's behalf, just Douglas's name and a notary. I sat with that for a long time. Then I looked at the trust document, which was a matter of public record because of how it was structured. The trust named Douglas as trustee with full authority to manage and dispose of the property. Walter was listed as a beneficiary, but a beneficiary with no direct rights to the asset itself. He could live in the house at the trustee's discretion. At the trustee's discretion. Walter thought he owned his house. He had lived in it for 44 years. He watered the roses Martha had planted beside the front walk. He still had his name on the mailbox. He did not own it. He lived in it at Douglas's pleasure. And Douglas could, at any point, decide that pleasure was over. I called Dana that night. She listened. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, Olivia, you need to get Adult Protective Services involved formally. You need to do this through the office. And you need to do it without tipping off the family yet, because the moment they know someone is looking, things tend to disappear. She was right. I knew she was right. I also knew that what I was about to set in motion was going to affect a real man's life in ways I could not fully predict. I was not an attorney. I was not a judge. I was a 26-year-old coordinator with a clipboard and a very bad feeling. But I had Walter's card in my desk. The one I had given him on my first visit, the original, because he had let me photocopy it so he could keep it. And on the back of it, in his careful, old-fashioned handwriting, he had written, "Thank you for coming back." I filed the formal report the next morning. The process that followed was not fast. I want to be honest about that because this kind of story, when it gets told, often makes it sound like things move quickly once the right person gets involved. They do not. There is paperwork. There are reviews. There are procedures T. Melane's jurisdictional questions. Dana walked me through everything. An adult protective services investigator was assigned. I provided everything I had. I was interviewed twice. I was told to continue my regular check-ins with Walter, but not to share anything about the investigation. Those weeks were some of the hardest I have ever had professionally. I sat with Walter twice a month. I drank his coffee. I listened to him talk about Martha and about the roses and about the neighborhood as it used to be. He told me once about a summer when Renee was 12 and she had broken her arm trying to climb the oak tree in the backyard, and he had carried her to the car himself because Martha was too frightened to look at the arm. He laughed telling that story. He laughed, and then his face did something complicated, and he said, "She was a good girl, Renee. She used to be a very good girl." I did not say anything, I just kept listening. The APS investigator, a quiet woman named Patricia who I think had seen everything possible in her career and had developed an expression for all of it, interviewed Walter separately. She was skilled in a way I admired deeply. She was not aggressive. She asked open questions. She let him tell the story in his own order, and she just noted where the gaps were. She also contacted the bank. She had authority I did not. And what she found there was worse than the house. Martha had a life insurance policy, not a small one, $280,000. It had paid out within 6 months of her death. The proceeds had gone into a joint account that Walter believed was his regular checking account. Within 8 months of the payout, the account had been drained in a series of transfers. The transfers went to a business account. The business account was registered to a company called DRM Holdings. DRM, Douglas Renee Marcus. Walter had received approximately $14,000 of that $280,000. His monthly spending money, $200 at a time, over several years, drawn from a balance that had already been moved. He thought he was living modestly on what was left of their savings. He had no idea that what was left had been almost entirely gone for years. I remember the exact moment Patricia told me this. We were in a small conference room at the APS office, and there was a vending machine humming in the hallway, and I just stared at the table surface for a moment because the number kept reconstructing itself in my head. $280,000. Gone. To a holding company with her children's initials. Walter's children had named a company after themselves to take their parents' money. And then they had given their father $200 a month and let him feel grateful for it. I had to hold myself very still. Patricia was watching me. She said, "I know." She said it quietly, like it cost her something to say it. And then she said, "This is why we do this work. Because someone has to be in that room with them." The legal process that followed required patience. I am not sure I would have had if I had not been coming back to Walter's house every 2 weeks and watching him drink his coffee from that single mug and sit in that worn spot on the couch. Patricia worked with the county attorney's office. A guardian ad litem was appointed to represent Walter's interests. An elder law attorney got involved on Walter's behalf through a legal aid organization. I was not central to any of that. My job was still just to visit, to check in, to make sure he was safe and fed and not in immediate danger. But Renee found out. Of course she did. Someone at the bank had to notify the account holder when a formal investigation began, and the account holder, as it turned out, was Renee. Not Walter. Renee. She called me. She had found my card somehow. I do not know if Walter gave it to her or if she went looking through his things. She called me on a Wednesday afternoon, and I almost did not answer because I did not recognize the number. I answered. She was not aggressive on the phone. She was worse than aggressive. She was smooth. She was the kind of person who had clearly had a version of this conversation in her head many times and had decided the best approach was to come across as concerned and cooperative and gently put upon by a system that was clearly overreacting. She said that she was so glad someone was checking on her father and that she had been meaning to visit, but Douglas had been going through a very hard time professionally, and the children were at complicated ages, and she was sure I understood that life got in a way that was nobody's fault. She said that the financial arrangements had all been done with her father's full understanding and agreement, and that he had wanted it that way because he was not good with money after her mother died. She said she hoped we could clear this up quickly because it was adding unnecessary stress to her father. I was very polite. I took notes. I thanked her for calling and told her the process would follow its course. After I hung up, I sat for a moment. And then I thought about Walter saying she used to be a very good girl, and I thought about that business account. DRM Holdings. The initials of all three of her father's children. Like they had included Marcus from a distance, looped him in, made it a family project. Like they had sat down together and said, here is what we do, and then they had done it and gone back to their lives and sent their father $200 a month like they were tipping a waiter. 2 weeks later, Renee showed up at Walter's house. I know this because Walter called me. He used the number on my card. He called me on a Saturday morning and said, Renee is here and she wants to talk about the house, and I do not know what to say to her. His voice was very controlled, but I could hear something underneath it. Not fear. Something more like a man steeling himself for a weight he knew was about to land on him. I told him he did not have to have any conversation he did not want to have. I told him the legal process was there to protect him, and any decisions about property or finances should not be made right now without his attorney present. I told him he could simply say to her, my attorney needs to be part of this conversation. There was a pause, and then he said, I have an attorney. I said, you do, and she is very good. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said very quietly, thank you, Olivia. I think about that pause a lot. That pause between learning he had an attorney and saying thank you. What was in that pause was, I think, the first moment in a very long time that Walter felt like someone was on his side. Not managing him, not arranging things, not deciding what was simpler for everyone else. Actually on his side. Renee did not get what she came for that day. Walter told her his attorney needed to be part of any conversation about the house. She apparently pushed back. He apparently held the line. She left. He called me after she left and said, that was harder than I expected. And then he said, but I did it. He did. The legal process took several more months. I will not walk through every filing because this is not a legal document and the details would blur. What I can tell you is what the outcome was, because the outcome was the point. The quitclaim deed was successfully challenged. Walter had signed it without independent legal representation, during a period of documented grief and acute stress, and with no consideration paid, meaning he received nothing in exchange for signing away his house. The challenge took time, but it was successful. The house was restored to Walter's name. The matter of the insurance money was more complicated. The transfers had been made from a joint account, and Renee's defense was that Walter had understood and approved each one. Patricia's investigation had found no evidence of that approval. Walter testified, through a formal process, that he had never been told where the money went, that he had thought it was being managed, that he had assumed Renee and Douglas were trustworthy. He was not dramatic in that testimony. He did not cry. He did not rage. He just answered the questions carefully and precisely in that same way he had answered mine on the very first visit. He was a man who told the truth because it had not yet occurred to him to do otherwise, and watching people try to build a case around that fact was genuinely something. In the end, a settlement was reached. I cannot share the exact terms, but I can tell you that DRM Holdings was dissolved. I can tell you that Renee and Douglas made a substantial repayment to Walter. I can tell you that Marcus, the son in the other state, was not found to have been a direct participant in the financial transfers, though the company name suggested awareness. His relationship with his father remains, from what I know, very complicated. I can tell you that Walter got his house back, not as a tenant, not at anyone's discretion. His house, his name on the deed, his to leave to whomever he chose. I can also tell you about the day the paperwork was finalized. The elder law attorney called me because she knew I had been part of this from the beginning. She said, we just recorded the new deed. And she said, he asked me to call you. I called Walter, he picked up on the second ring, and he said, Olivia, did you hear? I said I heard. He said, I have been sitting in the kitchen. I made a pot of coffee. I have been sitting here for about an hour just looking at the backyard. Martha's roses are coming back. I did not think they would because I did not water them right last winter, but they are coming back. I said that was wonderful. He said, I cannot explain exactly what I feel right now, but I wanted you to know I feel it. I said I was glad. He said you came back, the RSD time you said you would come back and you did, and I know that does not sound like much, but after a while a person stops expecting people to come back. And then you came back every time after that. And you brought Dana. And you filed the thing you filed even though I know that was not simple. And I am sitting in my kitchen in my house and Martha's roses are coming back. I did not have anything composed to say. I just said, Walter, I am really glad you let me in. Now, let me tell you what happened after, because the story does not end with the paperwork. Renee did not disappear. People like Renee rarely disappear after something like this. They regroup, they reframe, they find a new angle. About 3 months after the settlement, I got a call from Walter. He said Renee had reached out and asked if they could have dinner. She wanted to, in her words, start fresh. She had written him a letter. He had not read it yet. He wanted to know what I thought. I told him this was his decision and his alone. I told him I would support whatever he decided. And then I said, Walter, what do you want? He was quiet for a long time. And then he said, I want to know she means it. But I do not think I have a way to know that. So I think I am going to leave the letter on the table for a while and see how I feel in a few weeks. He called me 6 weeks later. He had read the letter. He said it was well written. He said it sounded like her voice and not like something Douglas had drafted, which he had been worried about. He said there were things in it that felt real to him. He went to dinner, just him and Renee, no Douglas. He came home and he called me the next morning and he said it was hard and it was not resolved and she cried and he did not know what to do with that yet. He said he would probably see her again but slowly. He was not in a hurry. I thought that was exactly right. I thought that was the wisest possible approach for a man who had every reason to close every door and instead chose to leave the possibility open while protecting his own peace. Douglas, from everything I heard from Walter in the months that followed, had not reached out. Walter did not mention Douglas except once, in passing, when he said he did not think Douglas would be part of his life going forward, and said it the way you say something you have made peace with. Settled, not bitter, just true. Marcus called, from the other state. Walter told me Marcus had called twice in 2 months, which was more than Marcus had called in the previous year. Walter was not certain what drove the call, guilt, probably, or the awareness that things had changed, and he needed to figure out what that meant for him. Walter said he answered both calls and they talked, and it was fine and maybe with time it would be more than fine. He was not giving up on Marcus, but he was not rearranging his life around the possibility of Marcus either. He said something to me once that I have thought about many times since. He said, I spent a lot of years making myself small so other people would feel big. I thought that was what a good father did. I thought if I was quiet and patient and did not ask for much, eventually the love would come back to me. But love does not work like a bill you pay. You cannot be quiet enough to earn it from someone who has decided not to give it. I wrote that down after I hung up the phone. I still have it. The grandchildren are another part of this story. The 2 grandchildren he had not seen in 14 months when I first visited. After the settlement, after Renee and Walter began their slow and cautious rebuilding, the question of the grandchildren came up carefully. Renee brought them once, on a Sunday afternoon. Walter made lemonade from scratch. He told me about it afterward with the kind of careful restraint of someone who does not want to get too hopeful too fast. He said the older one, the girl, was 12 now and had Martha's eyes. He said she sat on the porch and asked him questions about the old neighborhood, and he had not expected that, had not expected a 12-year-old to be curious about the past, and it had undone him a little. He said the girl asked him why he lived alone. He said he told her he had gotten used to it, but that it was nicer when people came. She apparently said, maybe we can come more. He told me that story and then went quiet, and I let him be quiet. They did come more, slowly, not dramatically, not in a way that wrapped everything up, just more often than before. The girl, whose name was Lily, had apparently taken a particular liking to Walter in the way that certain young people do with certain older people when they sense honesty in them and find it unusual and compelling. She called him Grandpa Walt. She wanted to see the oak tree he had told her mother stories about. She climbed it. I know this because Walter called me just to tell me. He said she climbed the tree. I could hear him smiling. He said Martha would have been terrified, and he laughed. I want to be careful about something here because I do not want this story to resolve into a simple lesson or a neat ending. Not everything was repaired. Douglas never apologized. Marcus kept a careful distance. The money that was taken can be repaid in numbers but not in years. Walter is 80 years old now, and the years he spent feeling like a burden, feeling like he was in the way, feeling like he should not ask for too much, those years happened. The isolation happened. The quiet, deliberate shrinking of his world happened. You cannot unsign that. But here is what also happened. He knows the truth now. He is not confused about what was done to him. He does not have to wonder or second-guess or explain away. He knows, and knowing has given him something that looks different from peace but functions like it. A kind of clarity. A kind of solid ground under him that was not there before. And I learned something from him too. I went into that house the first time with a clipboard and a depleted phone battery, and the belief that a routine check-in was just a routine check-in. And I came out of the whole experience understanding something I now carry into every case I take. The most dangerous form of cruelty is the kind done gently, with paperwork, with reasonable explanations, with the language of practicality and simplicity. With $200 a month given like a kindness, so the person receiving it never thinks to ask where the rest went. The people who took from Walter did not do it all at once. They did not do it in a moment of anger or greed that they could later call a mistake. They did it over years. They built a system. They called it arrangements. And they let him sit alone in a clean, empty house and feel grateful for the quiet. That is not a mistake. That is a plan. Now let me tell you about the part of this story that is harder to tell. The part that I did not expect. The part that happened to me inside all of this as a person, not just as a coordinator. I was angry. I want to be honest about that. I held it in a professional way because I had to, because that was the job, because emotional regulation is what allowed me to be useful. But I was angry. I thought about Renee's smooth voice on the phone and the way she said things like life gets in a way that nobody plans, as if she had not planned this very carefully, as if there had not been a meeting or a conversation or a decision where someone said, "Here is what we should do," and everyone agreed. I thought about DRM Holdings, those three initials, the family's initials. I thought about what it meant that they had named the company that way. It was not accidental. It was almost proud, like they had signed their names to it. I thought about Walter in that house for 4 days without speaking to anyone, not because he was unable to speak. Not because no one was nearby, because no one came, because the people who should have come had decided it was simpler not to. And I thought about the day he opened the door 4 inches and looked at me with those very blue eyes and asked if his daughter had sent me. He had been hoping, after everything, he had still been hoping. That detail never left me. It became the thing I returned to when the process was slow, or the paperwork was frustrating, or I was not sure I was doing enough. I would think about that 4-inch gap in the door and that hope in his voice, and I would keep going. After the settlement, after things had stabilized and Walter had his house back, and his name on the deed and a genuine attorney and a plan, I had a conversation with Dana. We were having coffee after work, and I asked her something I had been turning over for a while. I asked her if it got easier. The anger, the witnessing. She thought about it for a moment, and then she said, "It does not get easier exactly, but you get more specific. Early on you feel it as a general outrage. Later you feel it as a precise grief, which means you can carry it more cleanly." I have thought about that answer many times. Precise grief. I think I understand now what she meant. Walter and I still talk. I want to be clear that this transitioned appropriately after the case formally closed. He became what I would call a person I stay in touch with, rather than a case I am managing. This is not typical. I want to acknowledge that it is not typical. But the elder law attorney and Dana and Patricia all know about it, and no one has suggested it is inappropriate, because it is not. I call him once a month. He tells me about the roses and about Lily and about the television programs he is watching. He tells me when Renee visits and how it goes. He told me once that he has stopped feeling guilty about enjoying his life. That was not something I knew he had been feeling. But he said that after Martha died and things started going wrong, he had convinced himself somehow that he did not deserve much, that he should be grateful for whatever he got, that asking for more was a kind of selfishness. He said he does not feel that way anymore. He said, "I know what my house is worth now, not in money, just in what it means to be in it. And I know what I am worth to Lily, and I think I am starting to know again what I am worth to Renee, even if it is complicated. And I think maybe I always knew what I was worth to Martha. And that is a lot. That is quite a lot for a man to know about himself. I did not have anything to say after that. I just agreed with him that it was quite a lot. There is one more thing I want to tell you, and then I will let this rest. About 6 months after the case closed formally, I received something in the mail at the office. A card. Handwritten. Old-fashioned cursive, the kind of handwriting that takes time and care and speaks to a generation that was taught penmanship like it mattered. The card said, "Dear Olivia, I have been trying to find the right words for a while, and I am not sure these are the right words, but they are the true ones. You knocked on my door when I had stopped expecting anyone to knock. You came back when I had stopped expecting anyone to come back. You did not make me feel like a problem to solve. You made me feel like a person worth solving things for. I do not know that I have much to offer you except gratitude, and I have heard that gratitude is not a small thing. Martha always said it was the most generous of all the feelings because it means someone else's goodness reached you and you knew it when it did. Her roses are coming in very well this year. I thought you should know." I kept that card. I have it in my desk at home, not at the office, because it belongs to me and not to a file. And on the hard days, which still come, I open it and I read it, and I remember that $200 a month is not love. That simplicity is not an excuse. That the people who hurt others quietly tend to rely on the quiet person not finding the right someone to knock on their door at the right time. Olivia found Walter, and Walter, in all the ways that mattered, found her right back. Walter is real to me, not a case number, not a cautionary tale. A man who made coffee for two because someone said they would come back and they did. I want to ask you something honest before you go. Is there someone in your life who has made themselves small so others could feel big? Is there someone you have not checked on in a while, not because you forgot, but because you assumed someone else was doing it? Because sometimes the cruelest thing is not what is done to a person. It is the assumption that someone else is handling it. Leave me a comment. Tell me what this story made you feel. Tell me what you would have done. And if this story reached you in a way that matters, please share it. Because somewhere right now, there is a door with a person behind it who has stopped expecting anyone to knock.